And, of course, when Hitler came to power, the one lady being Jewish, my mother being a Christian, any business that had anybody that in the business that was Jewish, of course, was suspect. And they had gone to school together, had known each other, and then put a business together. They made dresses and designed dresses and costumes for the Cologne Theater and Cologne Opera. Did major productions of complete operas and took the dresses from the design phase all the way into the production phase. They had about 40 girls working for them in the little atelier where they worked, and the 40 girls, of course, were all Christian, and this was the only Jew in the business.
So Lily was the only Jew in the business?
The only Jew in the business.
Okay.
And the famous story that they tell of the Kristallnacht, when the Nazis came down the streets and smashed the windows and smashed the Jewish businesses that had been identified, the story that my mother tells, which she tells very proudly, was that she wasn't the only one that was against the intolerance of that time. She and the 40 girls, when the Nazis came, literally sat down in the steps of the business and said, "We dare you to come in here. We're not going to let you in. We're not going to let you destroy our livelihood just because we have a Jew as a partner in this business." And the Nazis went past that and saved that business, but it was short-lived, obviously.
Sure.
During the war, all of the businesses that had any Jewish connections at all were destroyed and eventually were closed down.
And now, how did your mother and Lily come to be such good friends?
I think it was a partnership, the same ideas. They were both designers. They both are very creative people. And they had a very close friendship. Lily was the one that did the actual drawing and the designing and the creative part of it, and my mother took those paintings and those drawings and then turned those into actual dresses, and that was the connection.
Now, I understand that your mother witnessed some of the actions of the Nazi government in the Vienna ghetto. Can you tell us a little bit about how they migrated from one place to another?
Well, they had the business in Cologne, and when the business just went away, basically, Lily was forced to go to Berlin for a short time, and she worked there in Berlin. She was forced by the Nazi government, or by the German government at that time, to go to Berlin. She was trying to get out of the country, and eventually ended up in Vienna. And of course, she wanted to go to Vienna because at that time Austria was not part of Germany. But of course, with the Anschluss, Germany took Austria, and when she got to Vienna, then she was in the same boat she was in when she was in Germany. When she got to Vienna, she was forced to go to the ghetto and live in the ghetto. My mother came to Vienna, rented an apartment, and at that time, the Jews were rounded up at night and put into the ghettos. But during the day, they would let them out at first and let them work in the cities doing menial tasks, sweeping the streets and so forth. When they came out of the ghetto, they had to be identified, and that's where they had to wear their Star of David or their armbands declaring, "I am a Jew." So Lily stayed in the ghetto at night. During the day, she stayed with my mother. They did whatever they could to make money, small seamstring, anything they could do to make money. Lily noticed, of course, that as she went back at night, large sections of the ghettos were disappearing. People were being loaded on trains and gone, just taken away, and never to be heard from again. The night that she knew that her section of the ghetto was going to be gone, and that was in early 1941, she said, I'm not going back tonight. I'm staying. I'm going to stay with you. Will you hide me? My mother said, sure, of course, and hid her for almost 4 years in Vienna. And it was a very dangerous time, obviously, for both of them, because if Lily would have been exposed, my mother obviously would have gone and been killed also.
How was she able to hide Lily as well as she did?
Well, it's the Anne Frank story, you know, of a fake closet or a fake place where that she could hide during the day. And literally never left the apartment. I take that back. She left the apartment once that she told me a story of, and went. She had been locked up for several years and had been in the apartment and said, I just need a breath of fresh air. She walked out the front door, sat in the park across the street and sitting on the park bench. And as she was sitting there, a Nazi officer came up to her, and the first thing, of course, he asked her was, what are you doing out in the middle of the day? Why aren't you working? What are you supposed to be doing? She was scared to death, obviously, if she was found out. He said, let me see your identity papers. She said, I forgot them. I left them in the apartment. And he said, I think you're Jewish. And she said, no, let me just go get my papers. So instead of going back to the apartment where they were living, she went down the street, ran and hid till the evening, came back and went back into the apartment, and never left again. Never went outside again until the end of the war.
I understand that Lily had a large family, and she was the only survivor, is that?
Only survivor. There were 7 brothers and sisters. One sister immigrated before the war and came to the United States. She's still living. She's in Wilmington, Delaware, and I keep in touch with her. The rest of the family, all brothers and sisters, all of the 7 brothers and sisters, other brothers and sisters, her mother and father, completely gone. They were all sent to the ghettos.
Okay. We have about 1 minute before we take a break. You shared with me a quick story about your mother saying goodbye to her brother and keeping Lily safe.
It was a very difficult time, and my brother, who was in the German army, her brother, my uncle, who was in the German army, came to say goodbye to her on his way to Stalingrad. And Stalingrad, of course, was a massacre for the Germans toward the end of the war. He came, she could not see him in the apartment. She said goodbye to him in the hallway. He left and was never heard from again, and the best we know is he's in a mass grave somewhere near Stalingrad.
So never to be seen again?
Never to be seen again. She was afraid to take him in because if he saw that she was hiding a Jew, he might inadvertently say something and give the whole scheme away.
Yeah, yeah. After the break, I want to come back to their life in the United States.
Okay.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this section of Faith Focus. We're talking with Klaus Driessen. And Klaus, tell me a little bit about your mother coming to the United States and Lily coming over, and what was their life like in the United States, and also your own life. I understand.
Well, of course, at the end of the war, Lily wanted to immigrate wanted to come to the United States. Her sister was here, so she said, well, I'll come on to the United States. And she came. She spoke very little English when she came to New York, and eventually ended up in Dallas. Started a business here. Had a hard time at first. It was very difficult, obviously, to get that going. And after the war, my father had died. We were having a hard time in Germany, my mother and I. And Lily said, well, come to the United States. I can sponsor you. You come. So in a way, my mother saved her during the war. And then she said, well, you come to the United States and maybe we can do something for you. When they got here together, they started a business and designed dresses, basically, for the Tyler Rose Festival, the Corpus Christi Buccaneer Days down in Corpus Christi. Made major dresses, which, and also just for people that came in and said, I would like to have this kind of dress made. Would you make it for me? I brought some of those,
please,
if I can show you some of that. These were some of the dresses that Lily actually would design. And someone would come into the studio and say, you know, this is the event that I'm going to. Can you make a dress that would fit that event? And they would make several drawings. Here's one of them, and you can still even see the little swatch at the very top, so they can give an idea of what the material would look like in the dresses. I brought several of these. Here's another one that's just a very simple, plain dress. And they made everything from these to wedding dresses to major Queen's dresses for Tyler Rose Festival and so forth.
You said something to me about some dresses being made for the Kennedy inauguration.
Yes, there was, when Kennedy was inaugurated, there were several ladies that were going to the inauguration, one of them being Nancy Williams' wife. And she came and said, would you make a dress for us? And she made a very beautiful yellow dress, fitting Yellow Rose of Texas, I think was one of the things that they were looking at. And she wore that to the inauguration dress. And I remember that she told my mother, Mrs. Williams told my mother, who made that dress? So it was noticed by Mrs. Kennedy.
Very good. What was your life like when you came to the United States? How old were you, and what was that like?
I was 8 years old when we came. Spoke no English. Got off the boat and had a very hard time at first. Was forced to go to school the third day. I remember the first report card that I brought home. The teacher had written down at the bottom of the report card, he likes to fight. So my mother asked, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, I fight at school. She said, well, why? And she said, well, let's go talk to the teacher. So we went to talk to the teacher, and she said, yeah, at recess. We let him out for recess, and the first thing we know is he's over there and he's beating kids up. And my mother said, why are you doing that? And she said to me, well, you told me that Nazi was a bad word, and the kids are calling me Nazi. Okay. And so when they called me Nazi, of course, I beat them up. So we had a hard time at first. It was a poor, we were very poor, and the business was very hard to get started. But once it got going, she did fairly well.
What can you tell us about your father?
My father was a German officer. German fought in the war. He fought in France, liberated France, as they said, and then also ended up at the gates of Moscow. At the end of the war, he was a prisoner of war with the Americans, was taken into Dachau, in the concentration camp in Dachau, and held there. And that's how they met. There was a process called denazification at the end of the war, and everyone who had been in the German army or who had been a Nazi, supposedly, went through a denazification program. And that's how my mother and he met. But he died shortly after I was born.
Shortly after you were born. Okay. And did you and your mother and Lily live together in the United States, or did you live apart, or how were you able to survive all the obstacles that coming to a new country brought up?
Yes, we all lived together. Lily, again, was the sponsor for us coming to the United States. We came in 1958. We moved into a one-bedroom apartment. I remember I slept on a couch and my mother slept on a floor. And it was just a very difficult time when we first got here.
During that period of time, do you remember any conversations between your mother and Lily about the war, and perhaps any of those memories being more haunting memories rather than joyful memories that the war was over? What was the atmosphere, perhaps?
I remember they would tell stories, and it was not very often. You almost had to force them to talk about some of the experiences in the war. I remember one story very vividly. They talked about when the Russians came into Vienna, and they came into their apartment, and somehow their door had been damaged, and the door was off the hinges. And when the Russians came through, they pillaged and plunged all of the other apartments. And when they saw that this door was open, they thought, oh, these are some people that might let us in. So they opened the door, let them in, and they said, oh, wait, we'll be back tonight, which really scared them. They thought, oh, goodness, these Russian soldiers are coming back. Well, when they came back, they had butter, and they had eggs, and they had meat, something they hadn't seen during the whole war, and potatoes. They hadn't seen potatoes during the war. I remember she mentioning that. And so they took the potatoes, and they were going to clean them and cook them. And they said, well, these guys are all right. We'll let them in. We'll cook them a meal, and, be okay. So one of the Russian guards, or one of the Russian soldiers, took the potatoes and was cleaning them. Well, he took them in the toilet and was actually cleaning them in the toilet. Well, these were Russian peasants, had never seen indoor plumbing. And when he flushed the toilet,
the
potato disappeared, and he shot the toilet thinking it was some kind of a plot. They were stealing their potatoes. So there were several stories like that, particularly after the war, when the Russians forced her to clean the streets with toothbrushes. But it was not that they were. It was almost like they didn't really want to tell those stories. It was a friendship that they had. They protected each other, helped each other in Germany, and then they did the same thing when they came to the United States and worked together.
Very good, very good. And I understand that as I mentioned in the opening statement, that your mother was honored by the Jewish government as a righteous Gentile. What can you tell us about that award?
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. My mother died in 1991, and about 2 months after she died, we got a letter basically from the government in Israel saying, we would like to honor your mother at Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is where they have a wall of the righteous. She obviously had died. I called the phone number and said, there's no way that she can come, and so forth and so on. We thank you very much. And the gentleman said, well, would you like to come in her stead and receive the medal from Yad Vashem? And I said, well, sure. And so my wife and I got a chance to go to Israel, saw the unveiling of her name as one of the righteous at Yad Vashem, which was a very, very moving ceremony.
I can imagine.
They gave me a medal, and I have now given that medal to the Holocaust Museum in Dallas, so that if anyone wants to see that medal,
it would be there.
It would be on display, yes, at the Holocaust Museum in Dallas.
I want to come back and talk a little bit more about the award and about her place at her name being at the wall. Okay, can we do that?
Oh, yes.
All right, great. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Faith Focus. We're speaking with Klaus Driessen. Klaus, we were talking a little bit about the award that your mother received and so on. You mentioned a medal that you had recently given to the Holocaust Museum in Dallas. Tell us a little bit more about the medal and how did you end up giving it to the Holocaust Museum, and a little bit of that story?
I have not been telling this story very much, and I was asked to speak to a group of young people, 15, 16-year-olds, at confirmation at a Jewish synagogue. So I took the medal with me. This is before I gave it to the museum. And I didn't think all that much of it. I had it at home in a closet, and occasionally I would pull it out and show it to people. And so as I was passing it around, it was given to the principal of the school. And she took the medal, and she was a survivor of the Holocaust, a second-generation survivor. Her parents had survived Auschwitz, and she took the medal, and she literally just started crying. And she held it very gingerly in her hand, whereas the kids had just kind of passed it around. And she said, I really don't think you understand what this medal means. It means that someone saved someone else's life. And she said, I have never seen a medal before this close. I've never held it in my hand before. I've seen it in museums, and I've seen it other places. I've seen pictures of them, but I've never held it before. And she was just moved to tears. And that image of her holding that medal and her crying just haunted me for days and days and days. And I thought, well, what do I do with the medal? I keep it at home in my closet or in a drawer somewhere.
That's right.
I hope that someone else can see it, and so I decided that we would give it to the Holocaust Museum in Dallas. And we took a trip over there, and of course they accepted it, and it should be on display very shortly at the museum there.
Very good, very good. The other thing is the wall in Jerusalem and the ceremony itself. What can you tell us about, a little bit more perhaps, about the ceremony and her name being on the wall, along with other names that we become familiar with now through the production of Schindler's List?
There were hundreds of Gentiles that saved Jews during the war. One of the most famous, of course, being Oskar Schindler with Schindler's List. But there are, in Jerusalem now, it's called the Wall of the Righteous. It's at Yad Vashem. And there must be maybe 1,000 names on this wall engraved in memory of those that put their own life, I guess, in front of others. There are other walls now that have been put up. When you go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., they also have a Wall of the Righteous. What you'll notice when you look through all of those, there are very, very few Germans, native Germans, whose names are on that wall. They're mostly from other countries. It was very difficult to hide Jews in a native country, obviously. And it's the shortest list, if you go to look at the list, who hid Jews. I guess what's unique is when you go to look at the Wall of the Righteous that you'll see my mother's name, Mati Driessen, and somewhere on that list is the name Oskar Schindler.
So they're both together in that,
both together on that wall.
If your mother were alive, and I were to ask her this question, I'm putting you on the spot, and I know that. What drove Mati Driessen to take such risks on behalf of a friend? What was going on inside of her as a Christian? What type of faith? What type of internal strength did she draw on to hold on and to save Lily's life?
You know, I asked her that very same question. I said, why did you do that? And her simple answer was, she was my friend. She looked past being Jewish. She looked past the hatred and the violence that was being taught during the time of the Nazis. And she saw past that and said, just because you've identified her as a Jew, she's still my friend. I may be a Christian, but I'm going to help you just because you are my friend. And that was the simple answer she gave.
What a friendship.
Oh, yeah, and it was a lifelong friendship that started in Germany and luckily was able to continue here in the United States. And those two ladies raised me, and I was lucky because I was able to get a perspective of the Jewish as well as the Christian. We were very lucky growing up, I was anyway, because I got to celebrate all the holidays.
All the holidays, that's right.
Rosh Hashanah to,
you were out of
Christmas.
school more than the normal student with all the holidays.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I guess so.
Klaus, as an educator, how can you tell this story? How can we use this story to perhaps prevent any more violence and any more prejudice? What can be done?
Well, I'm going to do a presentation in San Diego later this year, well, actually in February of this next year, talking about using the Holocaust in the curriculum, in the instruction of schools, to teach nonviolence, to teach that if you are violent, if you are prejudiced, if you do these things, this is what it can lead to. There could very easily be another Holocaust. All we need to do is look in our world today. We're looking at Bosnia, and look at Rwanda and some of those other places in the world where it's just a matter of people hating other people, and it's got to stop. And hopefully we can use the lessons we learned in the Holocaust, and we can carry those forward and say, if we don't stop the violence, it can lead to this again.
Okay. Do you think that through this effort we could answer the question that perhaps it's in the minds and the hearts of a lot of people, how can I help someone else? If it's a single individual or a group of individuals who are being threatened or perhaps abused in some way, is this something that you feel strong enough to be able to carry out and pass the message that justice and peace is better than violence?
Oh, yeah, I hope so. I hope we can get past the idea that I'm a black or a Hispanic. I'm a human being, and I need to treat others as human beings. And again, if there would not have been some people like my mother during the war who saw past that and saw past that prejudice and that hatred that was built up against Jews, all of that hatred and violence has got to stop, basically, is the bottom line of this whole story.
How would your mother react to someone coming up and saying to her, I'm just let's say, a housewife or a car mechanic or a teacher in school, do you think I could do that? Do you think I could stand as strong as you did for a friend? What would your mother say to that?
Well, I hope that anyone that sees violence or sees intolerance would be able to stand up and say, no, you cannot do that. You must not do that. And I think she would answer it that way. And it has to be one-on-one. You know, we can say that we want to do away with violence, but it's got to start with you and with me and with each of us, and say, I'm going not to be prejudiced anymore. I'm not going to hate. I'm not going to, continue these ideas of nonviolence, of violence. I'm just not going to do it anymore. And it's got to be one-on-one. And that's what happened here also. Again, my mother saw that there was prejudice against one person. She saved that one person.
And took steps to do that.
Exactly.
That's a great example.
Exactly.
So, thank you, Klaus. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you.
We'll be right back in just a moment. Thank you for joining us this morning, Klaus, and sharing your mother's very inspirational story with us. If you have any questions or comments on our program, you may write to us at the KXAS address on your screen. Thank you for joining us this morning on Faith Focus. Please tune in again next week when we'll hear from the Muslim community in Dallas and their response to the tragedy of the Oklahoma City bombing. Have a great week.